Hi.
Welcome everyone to the Culinary Responsibility class of the Food and Climate Shaper Digital Bootcamp, 3rd edition. The bootcamp is organized together with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. My name is Giulia Damali. I'm the director of the program, and I am super excited to introduce today's speaker, who I had the chance to meet first in 2018 when I was following the Food Innovation Master program. And he was the person who I heard about mouthfeel. To talk about how we have coating, contracting flavors in our mouth and how we could use all this for even consumer choices in supermarkets or in our everyday life. So without me spoiling too much of the content, I would like to hand over to Professor Peter Klosser.
Thank you so much, Julia. It's a great pleasure to be with you. This is for me afternoon, maybe not for everybody afternoon, but here in Holland, where I am, it's 5:30 now. So we had a wonderful day and it's beautiful weather outside. So it's a great moment to start sharing our thoughts on taste and gastronomy, and especially how we can use ideas on gastronomy to a little bit to change the world, but also to use the concepts that I'm going to tell you about in regard to the, let's say, the big themes or the big societal challenges that we have. So you saw maybe already on the introductory slide, you saw already a peculiar, let's say, range of professions with my name. It was said founder and professor and restaurateur. So it's a strange combination, not very, let's say, common. And indeed, I'm a person that is both in, let's say, academics and in practice. We still own a family, beautiful hotel family, restaurant and hotel. So we are very happy with that. But from the beginning that we started and that I took it over after a business degree, I started getting intrigued by taste and very much intrigued by real questions in practice. So the questions on why do certain wines combine good with dishes and things like that. Very practical from the beginning, and still even today, it's still very practical, but the scope widened quite a bit. And it led to all kinds of books, it led to all kinds of courses and studies and all kinds of ideas. So indeed, I would like to share that with you, and with that, I'm going to share my screen with you, because I did prepare a presentation for you. And here you see the logo of TASTE. TASTE is the Academy for Scientific Taste Evaluation. You, of course, thought that taste was a word and that described something that we need to talk about. But for me, it's a foundation that we started in 2017, which does, let's say, fundamental research on taste, taste mechanisms, mouthfeel, as Julia introduced, the concept of mouthfeel, but also to use these ideas to bring people to other food choices. And I was happy to get from you yesterday all kinds of questions that I used for preparing this presentation. So if you have any questions in the meantime, Julia will inventorize them and get to me if they need to be answered, but also hope to end this call it lecture with a roundtable for you to reflect and ask questions. But please do if you have. So this academy is what I have. I would like to talk about what we call culinary responsibility, and especially on the how and why of it. And this peculiar combination of roles that I have. Here you see some names. The hotel is called the Echelput. It's been in our family since '55. My parents started it, and my oldest son is running it now. We still are very active with the Academy for Gastronomy, which is basically in Holland well known for training chefs and sommeliers and WSET courses on wine and things like that. I got my PhD on taste classification in health sciences. The faculty was health sciences in 2004. And after that, I got some nice roles as a professor in hotel management schools. And that ended in October last year. So now I have full time to spend my days and hours on taste and all kinds of, let's say, fun affiliations that we have with the Google Food Lab, for instance, with the Future Food Institute, with the Bus Culinary Center, and many other interesting partners that we work with. So this is a bit of who you are talking, who are you listening to. This is basically our mission. Our mission is very focused on getting a better understanding on liking, especially liking of foods and beverages. And with this illustration, I also try to show you why that is very important. I believe that the illustration more or less speaks for itself. The head on the right doesn't need explaining. We really love that stuff. And by now, we also know that it's not very good for us. So liking is very much associated with all the goodies of the industry. If we say we need to move towards a more plant-forward diet, if we say people need to cook more or eat more fresh vegetables and nuts and things like that, fruits, of course, then most people react in a sense that is rather unfavorable because they say, well, that is not going to be tasty. So tasty as a word is very positively associated with the stuff from industry and even negatively associated with fresh and with vegetables and with fruits. So we did some research on that. So if you call a salad, for instance, a sustainable and fresh and healthy salad, it won't sell much. And if you call it an original Tuscan salad, it will sell. So there is something in words that is very important to understand, and also very important to realize that taste and our ideas on taste are very much influenced by many other things as well. So this is the mission, getting from a broad perspective, a very good understanding of why do people like things, because I'm very convinced that if we have or find the key of liking, then it won't be, well, let's say it will, I can't say it won't be a challenge anymore, but the challenge of moving people towards other patterns, other food behavior is going to be much easier because nobody objects to eating something delicious. So that's why I want to connect the word delicious and tasty and liking and palatability, all that, to the need for changing food behavior. That's our mission. So I've 3 parts for you. The first part is really on taste. So what is taste? Because we need to, if taste is important, then we need to talk about taste, of course. So what is it? And something has already revealed by Julia, talking about mouthfeel. Then I have a part on the food system. So why do we eat what we eat? Of course, that comes from a food system. So we need to talk about the food system at large. And then, of course, the last part will be about food behavior and about our choices. So that's the sequence that I have for you. So the first part is about this. We know what light is, and we know ultimately that when you break light through a prism, then you see that light is being built up by what we can say the colors of the rainbow, and that's nice because that's a very physical approach to light from physics. For instance, Isaac Newton did a lot of work on that. And the big question is, of course, if we know this from light, and we also know sound with frequency and intensity with decibel and hertz. So what can we do on taste? Well, is there an approach possible that makes taste as tangible and as visible and as objective as colors or sounds are or have been objectified? And that's a very first important question because well, I'm not going to do it, but I'm pretty sure, and possibly you are also aware of the answer. If we would go across the room our digital room and ask what is taste, then a couple of answers are very likely. One is it's personal and therefore subjective. And people will say all kinds of things. It has to do with culture. It has to do with the environment. It has to do with your upbringing. It has to do with all kinds of other things. But all of these things are personal. And even in our language, we have a saying about that. There's no arguing about taste. So for a long time, people have even said, don't even discuss taste, because everybody has its own ideas. Everybody has personal feelings about that. And it's a very silly subject. Stop there. Don't do things about that. And I believe taste needs to be really studied objectively and as objectively as possible, because it's very useful. We saw the use with light and sound and all kinds of other things. We have seen how important it is to really understand a subject. So calling it personal doesn't really help. And the problem is that it is not really personal, because salt is salt. And suppose we would be at a table, imagine, together, physically together, and then at a table and have the opportunity to taste sugar or salt or acidity. For instance, I would have a little saucer with vinegar and salt and sugar, and then have a tasting. You cannot imagine that people will say with the salt, oh wow, this is really tasty, this is really sweet. Everybody would look at that person and say, hey guy, you have a problem, because this is salt. So there is an objective side to taste that we need to recognize. So our mission is to do that, to really define, our first mission is to really define taste. And if you see this beautiful little guy here at the table with wonderful vegetables that really look very tasty, then of course, if you look at the words, then I would say it's very important to say taste to what's on a plate or what's in a glass. So what we eat and drink has some kind of a composition and is the result of, let's say, macromolecules of water, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and of course a little bit of tastes like sweet and sour and things like that. But that all together, that is on a plate or in a glass. So that's taste, physical. You can see it, you can touch it, you can put it in your mouth, and then something happens. And what happens is called tasting. And of course, you know that we have all kinds of receptors and types of receptors to do the tasting. And what these receptors really do is they, in modern concepts, they digitalize. So the broccoli is not going to your brain, but information on broccoli is going to your brain. And this information is, let's say, these are bits and bytes. It's a bit salt, it's a bit of information on protein, it's a bit information on carbohydrates, it's information on even the color, all kinds of bits and bytes of the broccoli and of the carrots and of all the things that we eat and drink are more or less recognized in our complete registry system, which has to do with taste papilla on our tongue. It has to do with feeling. It has to do with smell. And even our eyes and our ears all work together to register let's call them the bits and bytes. Then these bits and bytes go to the brain, and there they are reassembled. So the broccoli mysteriously changes in zeros and ones in your brain, and then we call it broccoli again, but we also label the broccoli. For instance, I hate broccoli, or I really love broccoli, or I need broccoli because it's really good for me. So we do all kinds of things with the broccoli, or broccoli is in season, or broccoli is not in season, or broccoli is from a greenhouse, if you should have real broccoli from the soil. So there's all kinds of information that's going on in our brain, which mingles with the real information on what it is. So here you see 3 levels of understanding taste. First is the physical one, The second one is the registrational side, which is important, but not really important, because the last, what happens in your brain is much more important. If something happens, and we see this with COVID, for instance, if something happens in your registry system, then information is distorted and you don't taste as much as you did, or with some kind of, let's say, medicine, you can also change perception. In all kinds of ways, the perception can be distorted. Normal sensory approach is we have a signal, in this case called taste. Then we have the receptors that do the tasting, and then they bring that to the brain. So this is the normal way any sensory scientist will look at this type of work. But I already said something about our brain. It's very possible that there's also this type of a tasting where our brain already has information and already instructs the tasting system, and even on what's on the plate, in this is going to be ugly, this is not delicious, this is not tasty, I'm not going to eat this. And you see the expression on the guy's face that that's exactly what's happening. He didn't put it in his mouth yet, but he already knows, or at least thinks he knows, that he is not going to like it. And that's what we need to discuss. We need to discuss, if we want to change food behavior, we need to discuss not only what's on the plate, but also what's happening in the brain. And if you want to reveal one thing that I want to share with you today, industry has become really good, but really good in understanding what's happening in our brain and learning from neuroscience how to make, let's say, these novel foods that we really crave for. So they have done their job, and you can say to our, let's say, artisanal trade, to chefs, etc., we should have done the same thing. We should have gone to neuroscientists or to the industry to learn from what they know. The next step is, of course, to use this information in taste. Taste, I take a quick step here, but this is because of time. If any of you wants to dedicate some more specific time, you can ask me as a mentor to tell you more about that. But the normal approach has always been taste is sweet, sour, bitter. That doesn't work because taste is much more, and our mouthfeel approach is a much better way, a new paradigm to describe taste. And what we do there is to look at aggregate terms, so terms that bring umbrella terms that bring many things together. And these three terms are called coating, contracting, and drying. So what we do with these terms is describe taste, not with sweet, sour, bitter, but on the effects that sweet, sour, bitter, and all the rest have on mouthfeel. And mouthfeel is, for me, the better term to describe taste. Again, if you want to know more about that, then let's do that in private. I'll be happy to do it, by the way. So coating is, excuse me, the drying side is everything that has to do with bitter, with tannin, with textures, with things that have a bite, things that you can crunch, things that make a sound when you eat them. So it's a very broad group where bitters are and all kinds of textures are. Then there's a contracting side, which is fundamentally different from the drying side, because here things contract in your mouth. Let's say in the above, the bitters, it's more drying, so it's absorption of saliva, but here your saliva gets activated and contracts. So acidity, salts, spiciness, CO2, cold, all kinds of things make your mouth contract. And the third group is called coating, and that's the group where you find the sweet and the fat, but also you see dissolved carbohydrates, so dissolved sugars. But also carbohydrates are also the starches, so the larger molecule change of starch, also in a dissolved form, give coating. So all kinds of fats, gums, proteins like gelatin, but also your not long cooked egg in the morning, a boiled egg of 3 minutes, for instance, would be a very coating one, but exactly the same egg 6 minutes or 7 minutes will become much more drying. And you know this effect exactly from preparing fish or meat. Probably if you cook your fish too long, take salmon, very specific in mouthfeel. Seconds too long makes it dry, and what you want is this juicy salmon where it's not done in the middle, because then it's still very juicy, etc. Well, having said that, this is of course the chef's approach about the salmon, which you know from the egg and from the salmon and from meat, people have their personal preferences. So there are people that like the 6-minute egg in the morning, and there are people that like a 3-minute egg in the morning. There is nothing that decides that the one is better than the other. It is just preference. And that's very important. People have preferences for mouthfeel elements. So one of the keys that we have here are concepts that both describe foods and they describe preferences. And that makes it possible to create a link between taste as a product quality and tasting what people do. If people have beliefs on I prefer coating, or I prefer drying, or I prefer contracting, and we have a taste check to check that with people, then you can, as a chef, also change your dish a little bit towards these preferences of people. So it's really helpful to understand that these concepts are, let's say, for me, they are more or less like the primary colors. Everybody knows that red and yellow together, and in all cultures, across cultures, and it doesn't really matter if you do it anywhere in the world, but red and yellow together makes orange, and blue and yellow makes green. And these are functions. These are universal reactions. And that's what we have to approach with. That's the way we approach taste as well. And that makes it possible to really understand taste much better on an objective level and in a universal way, that people really understand have a same understanding of what's happening. So that's a very important first step, to be able to understand taste well. You can do many things with that. I'm not going to elaborate too long on it, but on contracting, coating, and drying, you have different intensities. You can imagine that intensity is comparable to volume, for instance, in taste and sound. You can imagine also that there are many examples. Think on spiciness, think of different acidities, think of different oils. Products within the same category can be different in intensity. Beautiful example is also mustard. For instance, if you take the French Grey Poupon mustard, which is very strong, brings tears in your eyes. There are also very mild types of mustard. The important thing about that is if you have a very intense component that really does a big job in contracting, coating, or drying, then you can use less of that product. So, for instance, with acidities, or with the mustards, the very intense mustard may not be liked as mustard, but it's very useful to have it in your home, because with just a teaspoon of that mustard, you have the effect of, let's say, a big tablespoon of the other mustard. And that makes cooking very interesting. But also, if you want to reduce certain elements in your foods, for instance, salt, then these are possibilities with this new way of looking at taste. What also makes taste beautiful is that there are not only magnifying effects, but also masking effects. And these masking effects happen between the categories. We know this very simply, of course, already in food, making a vinaigrette. You have your vinegar, you have your oil, you have contracting and coating. Together, it makes a beautiful mix. But there are many more of these examples. If you don't like the bitterness of your coffee, you use sugar or cream, because again, it is drying and coating where you find your combination. So there are many examples in practice that are, well, that help you to understand taste in a more fundamental way, and taste becomes a very useful element in your whole approach. And that is, of course, very important if you believe, like I believe, that we need to change our food behavior a little bit. Well, it really is helpful if you have a good understanding of taste, because then it can easily be done. This was my PhD thesis. I proved that there are 8 flavor styles, and these flavor styles, this is the flavor style cube, a 3-dimensional model. So this is the, let's say, the 3-dimensional space of taste, based on contracting, coating, and drying, based on the intensity differences of contracting, coating, and drying, making that there are 8 subcategories. And this is really useful to classify, describe all kinds of different tastes. So that's the first part of the story. And this is the end of that story. You make the distinction between taste and tasting. So the difference between what products have and what people do. And that gives you the opportunity to both study products, and that's what we do with taste, with the foundation, really do chemical and physical analysis of what taste really is. You can also do them on the marketing side. You can study people and do studies on preferences. I have also a student working on that with the taste check to really get a good validated taste check to be able to understand and monitor preferences of people. And then tasty is, of course, in the middle, and that's where the magic happens, that a product is the right match between a person. So it becomes, even on a rather personal level, possible to make things tasty because you know what the preferences are and you are able to change your product in such a way that people like it. So that's a very important start for me for food behavior change and understanding food behavior. Any questions on this? Nope.
There has no question been posted in the chat so far, but I see Lisa has one.
Yeah, my question was about the 8 flavor styles. Are you able to share what those are and give kind of an overview of what you found?
Well, these are, of course, a classification of products. So for what we did is find iconic products that are very a good example of very contracting, very coating, very drying, and then all the mixtures in between. So it is a categorization that really works. That we, for instance, also use in wine and food pairing. We use this system to classify wines to say, okay, this wine is more on the contracting side, this wine is more on the coating side. And we use this information also for finding good combinations with foods, because we think that we should look for harmony. So if foods and wines have a similar flavor profile, then the combination between those two will probably also be good. Right? So a fresh salad with a lot of acidity is going to be contracting, and the flavor style is called fresh. But butter would be for an example of round. Caramel being much richer will be an example of full. So we have robust. We have all kinds of words to describe these 8 categories. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Good.
Valeria?
So,
we have one more
questions?
question, Professor, from Valeria.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I studied that my previous studies, that bitter is quite in trouble as a taste. I mean, of course, human development has been characterized by the search for sweet, because it was what actually we needed because of sugar.
Yeah.
But I mean, we also need a lot the bitter taste, because usually the bitter is characterized by, bitter foods are characterized by actually components which are really essential for our health. So what do you think about this? What will be the evolution of this taste, which is actually really important?
Well, I'm very happy with your question. It's very unfortunate that we have made mistakes in our scientific approach, and especially in bitter. One of the mistakes was that we regarded bitter as something negative, and not the positive side, as you correctly identify. Bitter is many nutrients, and many very positive nutrients have a bitter taste. So getting the bitter out of foods has not been a very sensible and very wise decision. And it has to do basically with a sensory decision. And the sensory decision was to use quinine as a bitter component. For instance, if you do research, of course, you want standardization, you want to have standard mixtures, and with bitter, they chose quinine. And quinine is not a very good choice because quinine has a very, let's say, unpleasant taste. It is a very well-known medicine, by the way. It's still the most active medicine against malaria, for instance. It's found in nature. That's also good news. But the bitter group is much wider than just quinine. So, for instance, if they would have chosen chocolate bitters, we would have gotten quite a bit different view on bitter. And the interesting thing about bitter, I've always found, is that people said it was a negative taste. It was the inspiration for the food industry and for agricultural people to get bitter out of foods and et cetera, et cetera. But the very funny thing is that if you look at the 4 or 5 most consumed products in the world across nations, across whatever, well, you can make a list. It's beer, wine, tea, coffee, chocolate, and they're all rich and bitter. They're all even the real lovers of either tea or beer or chocolate. They say the bitter the better. So there has been a very strange, let's say, misunderstanding on the interpretation of bitter, I believe, through wrong research choices. But if you look at people all over the world, we have consumed bitter at large and always loved bitter. So bitter can never, if you are against bitter, you could never explain the real rise, an enormous rise of IPA beers, for instance, because they're also very, let's say, very, very bitter, to say the least. So it's let's say maybe a good step to where I want to go. Our choices, our science, our food system, our many things people have made choices where, let's say, the culinary side, the chef side, or the real consumer side has not been involved. And therefore, we have, written books about that, and people say, well, this is science, so it's true. Well, we should have been more critical. Does that answer your question? Maybe not the one you expect, but I believe this is, there are many universities that need to rethink traditional views on taste, and especially on bitter. Also on sweet, by the way, but that's for a very different reason. Right. Well, let's move on to these choices that we have made. We have, of course, a global food system now, and that has, of course, been developed through the years. So I think it's functional to go back in understanding what are the roots of our global food system and what has basically happened in the food system. And this is basically what has happened. We came in the world out of a very difficult period of the Second World War. It was a world war, so all over the world there was suffering, in Asia, in Europe, in Americas, etc. And we came out of that horrible period with an idea, and that idea was no more hunger. Because also in Holland, for instance, we had the big famine, and people really suffered for malnutrition, bad nutrition, insufficient food supplies, etc., etc., etc. So the Marshall Plan and the ideas in the 40s and 50s in Europe and America, let's say in the Western world, was we are going to solve this. We need to solve that. And then ultimately, these choices have had all kinds of consequences. So if you look at that, this is let's say the first step. There are 4 stages in this process. The first stage is no more hunger. And in this no more hunger, you see some moving images. we looked at varietals. We wanted to have varietals that grow well and that were easy to mass produce. We did that in animals, we did that in feed, we did that in food, we did that in vegetables, in fruits, and we've made all kinds of choices to do two things: enormous quantity and a guarantee that this quantity will always be there. So very fundamental choices of taste or nutrients or things that biodiversity or regional or things that you may or may not find important were not a part of the choices that led to the Green Deal, that led to the choices that people made fundamentally on our food supply in the world. That also gave us the opportunity, by studying food much more, to really look at the ingredients. And of course, the science evolved enormously, and we were able to really get into the essence of taste and to really understand all the different things. At least we thought that we understood it. Very importantly, we also made another decision. And this other decision was, it doesn't really matter if the nutrients are not in the original product anymore, because we understand this so well that we can add it later on. So if your orange doesn't have vitamin C anymore, if your milk does not contain the original calcium, if your broccoli doesn't contain the glycosinolates or whatever, not a problem, because we know what it is, we understand the molecule, and we can add it to your product later. So this was also the start of all kinds of food additives and choices of changing food in such a way that we have thought, well, we can add it to the matrix later on. The third stage of this is a huge globalization, because everybody loves these foods. And this is also important because if you go into supermarkets wherever in the world, if you go into China in a supermarket, or in France, or in New York, basically, well, not 100%, but 70% of everything in a supermarket has turned a bit the same. So there is a kind of a global, and Michael Pollan has baptized it as the Western diet. We have grown into using the same foods all over the world. So everything that was original and regional is more or less gone. And of course, these foods contain a lot of salt, and I'm going to say every once in a while strange things. They need a lot of salt because they don't have a quality of itself. So we grow these big commodities, so they don't have a lot of taste from itself, and therefore foods from the industry need quite a bit of salt. If you would make your own soup, for instance, it would be very hard to even add the amount of salt that's in the packaged soup. So if you start counting, you see very strange things there. So this globalization and ultra-processed foods took our tables. And that, of course, led to all kinds of chronic diseases. Obesity turned into an increase in all kinds of chronic diseases, like diabetes 2, like COPD, like cancers, like all kinds of other food-related diseases. And this is really enormous. If you look at the data from, for instance, the World Health Organization, then the World Health Organization published that 7 out of 10 deaths these days are lifestyle related, so food related. And that also means that 7 out of 10 deaths are preventable if we would change our diets. But you saw the moving images. We don't do that. We don't change our diet. We know that this whole food system led to increasing health costs, etc. But our solution is not changing our foods. Our solution is start taking pills or start running more, which is really strange because the root of the problem, and that's why I showed you this sequence, the root of the problem is not that we took not pills enough. The root of the problem is that we apparently started eating things that are not really good for us. And if you look at these increasing health costs, well, these are new data of the Food and Land Use Coalition. And they started calculating what the net value and the net costs are of the food system. Well, the net value is enormous, 10 trillion. So 10 trillion, 10,000 billion. So that's enormous. But this is not all revenue. If you look at the food-related health costs, you see quite an amount, 6.6 trillion. If you look at the environmental costs, like climate change, but also loss of biodiversity, also erosion and things like that, it's quite a number, 3.1 trillion a year. Economic losses have to do with waste and things like that, and infertility and things like that. And ultimately, you see that the whole food system leads to a net deficit of 1.9 trillion a year. I hear quite a sound in my, what is that?
Yes, sorry, I unmuted the person.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good, doesn't matter, as long as it isn't me. So you see that this beautiful food system that we built now costs us 2 trillion a year. So the big question is not even if we want to continue with this food system, but if we can afford this food system, because it doesn't lead us to anywhere but to high costs. So this is something to really be aware of. And of course, you are all very well abreast of the Sustainable Development Goals, so I'm not going to go into them too far, but two things. Look at number 2, zero hunger. The whole food system has failed to do what it was supposed to start with. No more hunger, and we still have number 2 on the Sustainable Development Goals. There is still hunger. So it has failed its basic function. And then, of course, it fails in many other things because of the 17, about, well, 8 are directly related to food, 12 are more or less indirectly also related to food. So of the 17, a big chunk of the Sustainable Development Goals have to do with our food choices. So this is really something to take serious, and therefore we need to start talking about solutions. So that's part 3. Anybody on part 2? No? Okay.
Yes, I have a question.
Oh.
Hi. I don't know if it's exactly related to this part or the part before, but I was thinking on if, like, taste, I'm so curious if taste also develops, like, of course it develops, but does our taste, will it change in the future maybe too? Can we anticipate on that in a way?
Well, it's maybe a question not of the previous part, but of the coming part, Anna, because of course that's an interesting question. You remember the little guy thinking about the vegetables on his plate, and I talked about a little bit about perception, and that's a very hopeful message, because if you train your brain well, you can easily also learn new things. And our brain is a constant learning machine. And I'm really confident that if we start eating differently, we learn again what is out there and are conscious about the importance of taste. And I'm very confident that we will also start appreciating the foods, but you need to do it consciously, because our brain has not been taught well for the last, let's say, couple of years, if you are from a family that eats ultra-processed foods.
Because I can imagine too that we use our nose for a big amount of taste, but we don't use our nose for food so much anymore, since we also eat a lot of packaged food. I can imagine that the smell is also underdeveloped, or is going to be less used in future in the food part.
Yeah, well, the big question is if you need to call it underdeveloped or undereducated. Underdeveloped sounds something like it never gets back. But if it's undereducated, then you realize that what we need to do is start educating your brain again, and learning to taste the differences, and learning to understand what makes food so interesting. So many of these things have nothing not really a lot to do with either smell or taste, but have to do with our brain interpretation and our training. It's a cognitive process. It's like language. Imagine your first apple. You've never had an apple before, so you take a bite of the apple. Then you first need somebody who tells you this is an apple, because otherwise your brain cannot use any information. So here you have probably your mother says, Anna, listen, we're going to have something very special. It's called an apple. So there you are. You take your first apple and you register apple in your brain. And what you also do is register a bit of the taste of the apple. Now you get your second apple. The only reference you have, if you did it consciously, was the first one. So apparently you realize that you cannot say much about your second apple. The only comparison you have was the first one. So by eating apples a long time and by doing that consciously, you're ultimately able to really evaluate the differences. And that's exactly the process that people know from wine tastings and from beer tastings or chocolate tastings. So by doing it more and more and more and more, you learn the differences, and therefore you can start naming the differences and also start saying something about quality. But you need to do that consciously and quite a bit. So it's just a matter of doing it and start doing it. Right? Well, that's a very good start of the third part, because this is, excuse me?
I just wanted to jump in really quickly with a question related to this, to taste. This is Nicole. Hi. I read a book a couple of years back about the epigenetics of obesity and how especially ingredients in ultra-processed foods are changing actually our genetics and making people, babies, predisposed to obesity. And so I'm wondering how this actually interacts with taste as well. I don't know if there's a connection or if you've looked into this.
Well, I have, of course, a choice of many slides to put into presentations, and there is one that's not in this presentation, but it is a beautiful one, where you see a baby on mother's breast, and mother's breast has been illustrated like a hamburger. What that says is we are what we eat, and if you, as a mother, feed your baby, well, let's say politely hamburgers, then your baby is already predisposed to liking that, but also to not get a complete set of nutrients and a full set of let's say a balanced nutritional diet. So therefore, I certainly believe that there is predisposition, and I certainly believe that that is a big problem, because we well, need to acknowledge that we need to go first. Of course, the acknowledgement is that does it have to do with these ultra-processed foods? It's in part 3. My answer is yes. And then, of course, even these people have even more problem getting back to real foods, because they well, they have basically never been in a situation to understand real foods. They've never been confronted with it. So it is a part of the answer, and also for those people, the more difficult part of the answer. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So it's not going to be, this third part is easy for some and more difficult to others. Also, it's not in part 3, but to say this, we see this, for instance, in income and in educational differences between people. The lower educated, lower income people have a much bigger problem with foods, with health, with death rate. So there is even 8 in let's say in the developed Europe, there is 8 years difference. Even in Holland, a very developed country, there's 8 years life expectancy difference which is related to education and income. So the lower income has 8 years less to live, which is incredible if you understand how wealthy a country is, and if you understand that this has directly to do with the foods that they are more or less confronted with often and more or less obliged to buy. Especially 8 years from at let's say on a level of a society of civilization is 8 years a lot. because it's so that needs to be done. You see exactly the same thing, and unfortunately, America, but also Brazil now reaps, let's say, the bad side of COVID, because there's so many people that are predisposed with well, all kinds of chronic diseases that they are hurt by COVID much more than people that are in a good shape. So it's a very unfortunate relation for them, but it also makes clear how important food is. So that's the good side of the story. Ready for part 3?
Professor, we have one more question in the chat, and that's about neuroscience and how it is involved in designing food product.
Enormous. And at a level that is unknown even, but don't underestimate what is known, and don't underestimate the power of neuroscience. For instance, Pringles have completely been, for instance, sound designed. So the Pringle is, of course, completely artificial. It's nothing to do with an original chip or potato or crisp or whatever you want to call it. But it is a very cellular construct where the sound has been designed to cascade. So you bite it and there's not one air bubble, but a combination of air bubbles that is completely well designed. So it makes a sound that really triggers your brain like, oh, wow, this is beautiful. So it's very intricate how food has been designed, and very careful, and very, you can admire it if you're a neuroscientist, you can really admire what has been done and what has been achieved. It's enormous. But then, of course, we realize the bad side of it, and it's not as positive anymore. Or you can say, if it's so well known, let's use that science, let's make it public, because it's, of course, discretionary science. It's being paid for, and it is in the labs and stays within the labs. It's not published science. So let's get it out of these labs and let's make it public knowledge, so we can, as chefs, or as let's say more on the artisanal side people, let's get that knowledge going for us, because that's where there is enormous there's an enormous amount of money and knowledge.
I just had to remember one of the projects what we also hosted in the Polika Bootcamp last September, called Timus. I am posting the link in the chat. I'm not sure how far they are being involved in product development, but I'm like they are using neuroscience for some consumer research. So maybe you can guys check that out. That just came to my mind while the professor was answering.
Yeah, no, right. They're nice people. So it's very good what they do. They, for instance, discover how our brain works, and that as soon as that's one of the things that I learned from them, is that as soon as things become a pattern, then you stop thinking about it. So what the food industry has also done for a big part is making things logical. And by making it logical, you stop thinking, you just do it. You go through with your shopping cart in the supermarket, and you buy things as a routine. And as soon as the things become a routine, then the whole cognitive process has stopped. So that's nice when there are routines for you, because then we stop thinking. And that's what they really love, when we do things routinely. That having said, there used to be a time where I want to focus on food, people, and choice. Look at the yellow in the middle. There are we, the persons, the people. And we, of course, are different. We have different ages. We come from different cultures. We may have different religions. Of course, our spending power may be different. And there are many other differences. There's not even mentioned that there are men and women, also very different. And of course, based on that, we make food choices, and hopefully food choices that we like, that are good for us. So the yellow center of this infinity loop is important. Then there's a left side and a right side, and the left side, we call that driven by money. And driven by money, left side is driven by nature. Sorry, and driven by nature really means that your food choices are part of an ecosystem. And that means that you have to do with availability from seasons. And of course, with harvest because, well, fruit, pears and apples are in the fall, and things are in spring. And that we used to have a time that we had a meat month, and that was the month that the slaughter was taking place. And of course, that meant that if you have meat, then fresh meat was only in November. Now you needed to preserve it in some kind of a way. It's the same thing with the raspberries and the strawberries and the apples and your vegetables. You wanted to preserve them if you wanted to eat them out of season. So this driven by nature thing includes preservation, includes harvest, and includes a lot of variety. We didn't like that too much because nature doesn't always do what it's told. You have misharvests, you hope that you would have a lot of things, but then snails came or hail came or whatever other natural hazard came along, and therefore you couldn't harvest, or something went wrong in the preservation, you couldn't eat. So hunger and many other things, insecurity, food insecurity was a big problem of driven by nature. So I'm not idealizing driven by nature. I'm just saying what the nature of driven by nature is. Because of these, let's say, disadvantages of driven by nature, we have also developed our food system in a different way. So for instance, we decided it would be nice if we eat things on demand. So if we eat strawberries at Christmas in Europe, well, then they need to come from the Southern Hemisphere somewhere. So we need to transport them. And then luckily we have refrigeration, and we have all kinds of techniques to preserve them. So therefore our demand can indeed start, well, be, let's say, way beyond the original ecosystems. And then of course we have these industry people that can do it on a larger scale, make it more profitable. And well, we've learned about that. With that comes marketing, because these people need to sell it, and they work for a profit, which is logical. It's not, I'm not against industry, I'm not against profit, but it is a logical consequence of being driven by money. And that, of course, means that the whole role of retail and the role of shops changed, because they became more and more and more a part of a selling system from the industry. Again, as we say with driven by nature, there are beauties of it and there are disadvantages. And here there's beauty because it's very rich to be able to make your choice. It's very rich that there is no food insecurity anymore. There's no, well, apparently there still is hunger, but there shouldn't be hunger in this system, because it's because of waste, for instance, that we have hunger. We throw away 30% of what we produce. So if the efficiency of the system can be said something about, and there are many other things that we can't say something about, but there are positive and negative things here as well. So I believe it's very important to start here that there are two systems, and they are neither good or bad, but they are both there. What you can say is that there is a difference in the level of processing. Because with this driven by nature, you see low processing. This is the gray arrow, a low level of processing. And as the industry, or as let's say the whole system and the whole industry gets its way, ultra processing is also much higher. That is something to be said. And that has to do with, let's say, our food choices. So this used to be the normal system. We have agriculture or fishery or hunting or whatever. We have our food, we have raw ingredients. Some of them you can eat immediately, so it can be brought to the kitchen immediately and ultimately eaten. And there's basic processing, either done at home or done by the industry. And this basic processing are things like washing, removal of inedible parts, drying, chilling, freezing, pasteurizing, fermenting, grinding, pressing, all kinds of things that you can do at home. But that being said, it's rather practical that there is an oil mill that does the olive oil, that you don't have to have an olive tree and an olive mill in your garden, etc. So there's a lot of this basic processing that's very good and very helpful and very economic and very efficient. So nothing against processing. So this, you can understand, was a food process that really worked well for a long time. But in the, let's say, 60s, we started thinking a bit differently and said, okay, we still have agriculture in some way. Well, we have talked about that. Our foods have changed a lot. So our raw ingredients have changed quite a bit. And then the next step is that we said, well, this kitchen, let's stop there. Why? That cooking is so takes a lot of time. It's very complicated. It's messy. You have to clean your kitchen, and etc. Michael Pollan at one time said this whole movement of stopping to cook has also to do with emancipation in many modern homes, where cooking, of course, was a household function of the ladies. And with emancipation and education, we also found that we needed to rethink that, and very rightly so. So the whole, let's say, upcome of the ultra-processed foods was a very helpful way of avoiding a discussion in the homes where the lady could start saying to the man, I'm going to work and now you are going to cook. And by the way, change the diapers as well. So this was a very, let's say, easy way to get around difficult social discussions at home, to start using all kinds of foods that were pre-prepared. But this pre-preparation led to ultra-processing and the ultra-processed foods that came to our meal directly, so without the kitchen. So of course, there are still some raw ingredients that you can eat without ultra-processing, but the main part of everything that we eat now has to do with these ultra-processed foods, and that ultra-processed foods are our meals. And that last part is very important. Also important is that the traditional way of processing has completely changed. So now we talk about extraction, refinement, about hydrogenation, hydrolysis, chemical modifications. We, as I said earlier, we add things later on. We of course change colors. We have colorings and additives, etc., etc., etc. What I want to show you here is that the way we do our processing these days is completely different than the regular, normal processing that we were used to. And this is something that not everybody realizes, how much has changed in our foods. And because we do this, many of these things, because they are helpful. So they basically sound like good news. If you have a modified starch, in practice, that means that this modification of the starch helps you to make bread better or sauces better or more easy. It doesn't get bad as it used to be. And if you start using the rice or the grains and your grain from the mill directly, it's going to spoil within, let's say, a couple of, at least within a month, it has turned rancid. So many things sounded like very good and positive ideas, but with that came, let's say, the problems with the ultra-processed foods. Also, very importantly, foods were the origin of our cultures. They were by definition regional. They were by definition seasonal. And culture and food were, let's say, very close to each other. And that has also disappeared. So the origin of our foods, the origin of what our parents ate and our grandparents, and the expression of our lands and our foods has disappeared. And that is basically let's say, again, some things are good about that, but also bad about that. And we have done that because nature doesn't do what it is told. Also, we see that this gives problems in discussion. If we look at what is good and bad in food, people say bread is very good. Other people say, no, look at this pile of research. Bread is very bad. And the same thing with milk, and the same thing with vegetables. Very, very, let's say, a lot of, let's say, mixed discussions. And the real problem is that we are not talking about the same things. If we talk about bread being full grain, original, with natural yeast, for instance, the bread is more or less like we used to have, and probably from a health point of view, very different. I'm not saying good or bad, very different than the bread that has all kinds of substances that make the bread better and keep better, etc. Many people don't know that milk, for instance, is one of the most inconspicuous ultra-processed foods. If you see what happens in the milk industry, it's being collected. Well, for one, there are 4 big dairy companies in the world, and they dominate dairy. So the Friesland Foods in Holland, the Fonterra in New Zealand, Danone in France, and which one am I forgetting? But the Lactalis in France as well. They are the big dairy companies of the world. And what they basically do, they collect with individual farmers, collect the milk, then the milk gets to the milk factory. And this example, please keep it in mind, because that's exactly what happens with everything. The milk comes to the milk factory, then it's completely fractionated. So that means water and proteins and the lactose and the fats and whatever is all taken apart, all siloed in different silos. Part of it is, of course, synthesized and made more of it. And we also look very much at the value of these individual components. Just recently, there was a documentary on the dairy in Holland, where the milk proteins or milk fats, milk fats were very valuable and asked for in the pharmaceutical industry. So what we do is we sell, of course, for a higher price, milk fats to the pharmaceutical industry. And then we add, hold your breath, palm fat to milk to add again the silky, milky, fatty component. Is that real milk? Or are we getting palm fat with regular milk that is labeled as full milk or skimmed milk, whatever, in the shop? And of course, there is no declaration on milk on the package, because globally, milk doesn't have to be declared, just like bread, by the way. So we eat and drink not the real milk. And if we talk about milk, for instance, being good or bad, we need to first talk about milk. Are we talking about real milk, or are we talking about an ultra-processed product called milk? That's different. And then, of course, the results of research are also going to be different. Well, the same thing with fruits and everything. And we suggest that there is a certain compound of nutrients that's hard to measure, but it's very important to measure, because we suggest that eating X amount of X grams of fruits and vegetables are good for you. But nobody is ever talking about why, or are the suggested amounts of nutrients really in the fruits and vegetables? Of course, we need to know that, because otherwise the whole idea of eating fruits and vegetables is on a, let's say, slippery road. So we need to really be talking about the same things here, and especially in food and nutrition and health, there's a big need for truth and transparency. So, of course, the bigger question is why do we do all this? Well, look at the moving images. We do all this because we buy the stuff, and this is all products based on corn. It's all based on corn. Corn is one of these huge commodities that is being grown all over the world at enormous quantities, and we do this because we make so many things of it. All kinds of products, all kinds of additives. Of course, the fats are used for plant oils. We even use it for biofuels, which is very, well, you can talk about that as well. But ultimately, many of the grains are used to feed cows. And that is really strange, because these grazers, cows and sheep and camels and buffalo, they're all meant to eat grass. That's their system, not to eat soy or manipulated grains from somewhere in the world and give that to cows, because then the meat quality is better. So the whole protein discussion and the let's say the feed in and food out ratio of especially bovine meat is very bad. But that doesn't mean that cows in general or meat in general is bad, and that's again something that we need to discuss in the let's say the whole global discussion on our food system. Our animals are very important in the food system. They have the natural phosphates. They have the natural ways of fertilizing our meadows. So we need animals, But what we don't need is doing the wrong things with animals. Then we have the problems. So feeding cows grains give methane, and methane is a very aggressive greenhouse gas, much more aggressive than CO2 and others. So feeding cows differently will also solve the methane discussion. So we need to look at things much more systemically, and we need to rediscuss why do we do all these crazy things in the food system. Well, one of the reasons is this: we don't cook anymore. We're addicted to convenience, and convenience is for everybody. It's very nice if you don't have to be in the kitchen that long. And therefore, the question that was asked earlier has to do with this. We use these packages. We use it because we like them, tasty, but also they're very convenient and they are not very expensive. So what we eat is not only very convenient, it's also very affordable, it's also very tasty. Not tasty, maybe not in the way I would prefer, but certainly in the minds of the people, they are very tasty and convenient and affordable. Which really means that if we talk about changing food behavior, then getting a better liking of deliciousness and of foods and beverages, we are back to this illustration. We need to understand all these things to change food choices. And that's again something that's really missing in the debate. If we look at the Eat Lancet report, for instance, you probably have heard from it. Eat Lancet is a group of academics, nutritionists, environmentalists together, no chefs, no people that eat, no people that's called Eat Lancet, but then Eat is an acronym. Not the real people are on the table. And I believe that's the big problem that we have. A lot of the debate is not being held with chefs, at least. And that's a problem because the culinarians hold important keys. We understand liking, we understand deliciousness, we understand the original processes, we understand the importance of buying things locally. So these are all things that chefs could really help. And therefore, I believe that culinarians are an important agent of change for to change the whole food system. And then ultimately, of course, this CAT approach, convenient, affordable, and tasty, is one of the things that we need. We need people that help us making the novel foods, the new foods, that they are real foods, more vegetables, fruits, all right, but not without meat, by the way, but not completely vegetarian, I mean. But if a vegetarian dish is delicious, there's no problem for people going to eat more vegetarian dishes. But if they are not delicious, if we don't comprehend delicious food design, we don't. Many chefs that are traditionally trained, they see a plate and they say, okay, now we have a vegetarian. So they take the meat component off the plate and there's an empty place on the plate and they put more vegetables there. Well, that's not a vegetarian dish. That's not even a dish. That's a collection of vegetables. A dish is a composition, and a composition has a carrier, has connections, has things on a plate. Then you're intelligently designing dishes, and that's what needs to be done. But then with the dishes that not only look very nice, but also taste very nice, because then I certainly believe if this is going to be your beetroot salad, you're certainly going to eat it not only once, but more often. So convenient, affordable, and tasty for the future is going to be an important side. I'm very fond of closing systems or getting back to localization in a smart way. I think it's going to be difficult to ask people to go all go to the farmer, but everybody knows if you see the strawberry, you know the problem. If you buy the strawberry now in the shop, they look red, they look promising, they are in the bonus. So you're going to buy them and you take them home and you open your package in plastic and they don't taste. So the first thing you do is to add sugar. And that's the additive. And that's exactly why strawberries or whatever are such a beautiful example of what's wrong in the food system. Is if you grow things that don't have taste, we need to get salt, we need to get sugar, we need to get fat, we need to get the additives to get things tasty again. And the solution with strawberries is also simple. They grow well, either with a little bit of protection of plastic in the greenhouse or whatever. But they grow well, but they don't keep well. So if the local system is closed, and with intelligent informatics, we can easily do that. The supply can be more often, because now it's dominated by, let's say, people that don't like taste, and then they say, well, the strawberry, the cycle needs to be 2 weeks, and then the grower says 2 weeks. Yeah, you can do it. And then of course, he selects a variety that is red already early. It tastes like a cucumber, but that doesn't matter. It looks red. And then it's harvested. And then, of course, it goes in this big distribution system, because the supermarket doesn't want to throw away the strawberries. And that's where the problem is. So if we look for smart localization, if we look for smart supply of ripe strawberries, then they are promising. And then you are also rewarded, also from a taste perspective. And then you would love strawberries. So then we need to reconsider the choices that we make in agriculture, and getting back to products that have really taste, because that really helps. Well, this is because you haven't heard me talk about culinary responsibility, but this is all culinary responsibility. We want a world that's more sustainable, more circular, that gives healthy products. We want businesses that inspire, that use these products, and the global mission that Julia has been on. That's a beautiful program. Well, there was a time that we could travel, and then this beautiful. There are books written about it with all kinds of inspirational people, inspirational businesses that show that it can be done, because it can be done. Because you need business leaders to do it. And then, of course, the consumer wants convenience and affordable and tasty. So if we deliver that in our businesses with new foods, I don't see why it wouldn't work. And that's culinary responsibility. Bring everything together, getting into, let's say, a bit away from corporate social responsibility, or let's say a very sustainable responsibility. Food brings it all together. So why not call it culinary responsibility? Because in eating better, we are solving also many of these sustainability issues and many of the healthy issues. So culinary responsibility and taking responsibility and finding ways to apply culinary responsibility is going to be really important for the future. So these are some final slides. Every choice you make is a vote. So if you buy things, you vote for a system. So if you buy the cheap stuff, you actually endorse the cheap stuff. So by taking responsibility, eating differently, buying differently, and cooking yourself, you also ultimately change the system. And some people call me naive when I say this, but I cannot see it differently. Our choices ultimately decide on what the food system is. And it's the wrong way around would to see it that way, that the food system is there and that we are the result of the food system. No, it's the other way around. Consider that the global food system is the result of our food choices and not as the start of it. I believe for today and for a discussion and to think about that, I think it's really important that you consider the possibility that the global food system is the result and not the start of the food system. Because then if you see it as the result, you can also start it, and then you and me and everybody can make different choices, and ultimately that will change the system. Cannot be otherwise. So if you want to read more about gastronomy, of course, there's a beautiful book about that. For now, I'd like to thank you for your attention and open the discussion round. If there's still time, Julia, I don't know about time. Is there still time?
We still have a bit of time.
Okay. Good.
Thank you so much. And I think we already have one question in the chat. Jan, do you want to ask?
Yes, the presentation is amazing, Professor. And I, being a research culinologist, have one question. Keeping current lifestyles in mind, do you feel there will or might be a future for past traditional and cultural food or eating or cooking practices?
Oh, I'm very sure about that. We've lost quite a bit, but a lot of cultures still have very good things. For instance, let's take the vegetarians again. There are countries like yours that have never eaten anything but vegetarian. So why not look at India? Why not look at many parts of China or Asia at large? Is basically much more, originally certainly, much more vegetable and fruit dominated than meat dominated. So let's learn from that, and let's get that known, and let's not just look at the West from previous boot camps. I had the pleasure of meeting many other of guys like you, and we, every once in a while we come to that conclusion. Isn't it strange that our whole debate is dominated by the West, by English-speaking people? As soon as you start publishing in German or French or Spanish or Mandarin or Hindi, your academic pieces are not read anymore. Isn't that weird? Isn't that strange? Shouldn't that change from the start? We're all different. There's so much in the world. Why does this Western people, this Western way of thinking believes that we know everything? It's crazy. So I'm very confident that if we would start having an open mind on cultures and learning from other cultures and seeing the beauty and the richness of cultures, then it would really help us enormously. So that's why I also really like these programs, because this is what brings people to the table, right? That's a beautiful thing of these times. We never had so many personalities, so many people around the table because of these digital possibilities. Wonderful. Let's make use of it, and let's start changing, because it must change. So let's do it. Don't wait.
Thank you, Professor.
Enzo, do you want to go?
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation and plenty of insights.
Enzo, we cannot hear you very well.
Can you hear me well?
I can hear you, but apparently Julia not, but I can.
Sorry, then it's maybe my ears.
Is it okay or it's not okay?
It's okay.
So
scream a little. It's very low, but you can be heard.
About training.
No, nothing.
No? Okay. So I'm thinking about how cigarettes in the 60s, 70s were sponsored by Hollywood stars, and then the training changes, and at some point on the package, we can see the damage of cigarettes. So since then, the trend has been declining more and more. So I would like to know your opinion about the impact of visualizing the damage of food on packages, for example. That's one idea. The other idea is about how is in the academy gastronomy training is present this stream of knowledge that you mentioned, that who is in the kitchen is also responsible, is a leader of the impact of his own community, not just for the food, but just linking with the question from before, question about the culture. Supposed to know about the culture, supposed to know about the impact of the ingredients and impact of the health, because the more people eat something unhealthy, the more the health system will be a burden from this. So that's the true side of the question. Thanks.
Well, there are many questions in one, Enzo, but let me first start with the first part, the cigarette part. I think we need to acknowledge that when the cigarette people couldn't work for the cigarette industry anymore because they were revealed, then they started working for the food industry. So the same, let's say, publicizing companies and exactly the same approach as in the cigarette world was applied in the food world. For instance, with one of the first things is that what they did was an institute, an academic institute for tobacco, where paid scientists worked for, let's say, bringing good news about tobacco in the world. Well, in the food industry, you see that all over. In Holland, Holland is a very important food nation. So unfortunately, we see a lot of the bad things as well. And we have a sugar institute, we have an alcohol institute, we have all, and they are all back with a huge number of professors and scientists that do research to support the idea that sugar isn't that bad and salt isn't that bad and alcohol isn't that bad, etc. So first thing we need to acknowledge is that there are certain techniques, but in public relation techniques that are very well known in the food industry and in the tobacco industry, and they're basically the same. So that's one. So it's built on manipulation and keeping, let's say, bad information off the street and just publish good information. So that's one. Second is chefs indeed are a very important part of change. In education, and we that's also things that are in the Future Food Institute, but in programs, I work for the Basque Culinary Center. Every once in a while, well, again, before COVID, I gave lectures at the Dublin Institute of Technology. I was in China. We are going to run a program in China again in the coming months. And it's all for chefs to really help chefs in thinking differently on foods, and to also make them more aware of their role. So that indeed is a very important part. And then the culture side is I believe when you are more or less focused on local, and you are, let's say, you see yourself as a connector, as a chef, as being a connection between what your surroundings, what your environment has, and preparing that in a delicious way for your guests, then you are already on a very good track. The last element of your question has to do with health. And the health part is the most difficult part, because the health discussion is also very much dominated by, I'll say it politely, by interests. Maybe that's the best way of saying it. So I stopped in my academic period, I stopped using even the word health, and I started using vitality. Because everybody loves vitality, and you can be, if you are very vital, then you're by definition healthy, and you can be very healthy according to the record, but not very vital. And what the problem with health is that we have also protocolized health. So we have said this is healthy and this is not healthy, and in our food behavior and in our food, let's say, our food authorities around Europe, they are going to label foods as being bad and good. And I don't really, I'm not really fond of that idea. I don't believe that foods are meant to be good or bad. I believe patterns can be good or bad. So if you eat an apple, well, that's of course clearly labeled as good. But if you would eat just apples for a complete month, you're probably dead, or at least seriously ill. So what does that mean for the apple? Well, nothing. It means something about eating all apples all the day. And that's exactly the same thing with these ultra-processed foods. If we eat French fries all day and beautiful chocolate cakes and muffins, and that's your complete diet, well, then you're running into problems. But that doesn't mean that a muffin is bad or French fries are bad. It means that you should not eat all French fries all day. That's what it says. And that's why I'm very fond of the idea of labeling things vital or good for vitality or things like that, because then you also include that your lifestyle and who you are, larger person, smaller person, man, female, doing a lot of sports, doing no sports at all, whatever, that we are different. So why is there one size fits all in health and in nutrition? It's very strange. Right.
Nicola, you still have a question?
I think Joy was before me.
She removed her hand.
Yeah, it's just because I have a meeting that is supposed to start right now, so I didn't want to take the time. But I just wanted to ask, how do you reflect that on the ECOPUT? I'm sorry for butchering the name, but what are the solutions used there?
Well, the ECOPUT is a beautiful example. Before my time, so it's I bring the credits to my father. We are in the middle of the royal forest, a hunting region of the royal family of the Netherlands, and they have quite a forest. It's 10,000 hectares and more. And this forest is rich in game. And our ECOPUT restaurant has always been focused on game and the other products from the forest. So certain berries that we find, wild raspberries, wild blackberries, herbs that we find, mushrooms, of course, a large amount of mushrooms. So we have always seen ourselves and defined our kitchen as being let's say, a result of our surroundings. So we never said it when in the 60s, but it's very modern to say it now. But we weren't in the 60s and still do that. We have always been, let's say, specializing in game. We changed also the way even the 3-star French chefs prepare their game, etc., because we found a better way of doing it. So researching what's around you and then use that in the best way possible and making it very delicious is the best way of knowing your surroundings is maybe the best advice. Often people don't even know where they live and what's around that. Get that back.
So now I can go. I saw Joy just pop up just before me, so I laughed because we were in synchronicity, but she was a second earlier. And thank you for all of the insights. I think this was very rich, and I couldn't agree more with you. I have a hospitality background, so that's in my veins, and we lead a social movement, which is called the social gastronomy movement. So bringing social back into gastronomy. So it's very aligned with what you were sharing. And we were also part of the co-creation moment of a chef's manifesto back then. And the one question that we're asking these days is, if you could encourage chefs to take one action to promote good food for all, what would it be and why? But one action, because we're plenty, and you covered a few of them as well, but one thing that really can pivot the paradigm.
Find the best local farmer around you and start working with them intensively. That's one thing. I would so much like to say more, but I think you'll ask one thing. Find your best local farmer, work with them, start working with them. Also planting things in so a real conversation, not I'm going to buy the stuff, what you have, no. Getting to conversation. What do you need? What are your ideas on the plants? What are your ideas on varietals? What are your ideas on using things? How much in what season? And make things start recreating connection. We are disconnected, and we need to reestablish connection. So that's the one thing.
Thank you, Professor. I think these are perfect closing words for this very rich conversation and presentation. As always, I'm always impressed. Thank you so much for joining this edition of the bootcamp as well. And for the audience, you have now the contact of the professor. So if you have more questions, you can always reach out to him. And well, thank you, and see you on the next sessions.
It's a pleasure. It was a pleasure to have you around me on my screen. So thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.